Gang, what's up? Hope everybody's having a good day out there today, and thanks for tuning in to the video. Much appreciated. Today we're going to talk about fishing the back end of coves. Now, out of all the videos, I've done 1,500 videos so far, and I've never done one on fishing the very back end of the cove. So high time to do that. So I'm going to give you guys some tips and advice on giving you my opinion on the best way to approach them. I think you guys might find it interesting. And real quick, just want to remind you guys, we're getting close to the end of the month of August, and all through the month of August, Solar Bat Sunglasses has got their special on. You buy one pair of my signature series RB2 sunglasses here, and you get a second pair free out of a grab bag of glasses. So it's a good way to get you some good glasses and get you another pair free along with that. I'll include the Solar Bat link in the description if you guys are interested in that. Much appreciated. Okay guys, let's talk about fishing back into coves. Now, back into coves, I got to tell you guys right off the bat, they are my least favorite place to fish on any lake across the country. The reason is because they are the most popular place. It's like the back end of coves, the back end of creeks, all that type of stuff. The very far extremities of any place you go to, like the back of a cut, excuse me, those things get hammered. I mean, it's a lot of guys, I bet half the bass fishermen out there, the first thing they do to any lake they go, even pros, they run to the back of the creeks, they run to the back of the coves and start fishing. They get relentlessly hammered. So my advice right off the bat would be to stay away from the back of the coves if you can get anything else going, because the back of coves, I'm going to talk about some of the negatives about it, then I'll get into some tips on how to fish it. If you fish the back end of coves and creeks, you're going to get burned eventually, because what happens is if you happen to get into, like, say you're the first one in the back of a cut like this or something, and it hasn't gotten a lot of pressured, you're going to catch some fish back there, and I call those ghost fish, because what happens is if you run to the back of a cut like that, and usually if you're in a major creek, like we're in a major creek right here, the first thing people do is run the back of the coves and the cuts and major creeks. So if you pull in there at 9 o'clock in the morning and catch a couple good fish, there's about 100% chance that somebody's going to roll in there, or a bunch of boats are going to roll in there and fish that thing sometime during the course of the day. So what happens is a lot of times is you'll run a couple of these back ends and the timing's right and you'll catch some good ones on them, and then you'll go back later in the day or the next day or the day after that, and you can't catch anything because they've gotten so much fishing pressure. So my first advice is to stay away from the back of the coves. But other than that, I'm going to give you guys some tips on how to fish it here. So let me lay this out. Sort of go over a little bit about the typical back end of the cove. Now this is the back of a cut right here, but most coves are like that. And as you can tell right now, the water is pretty low in this. You can see, you've got some bushes on the bank, and you've got some, logs that are up on the bank when the water's up higher, and then you've got the lower water here. Couple of different options, guys. If you're fishing back of the coves and the water's high, like up in the bushes, this is one of the best places to fish flooded bushes if the water is not super high, because the back end of the cuts like this, they're going to have the deepest water on any flooded bush on the lake. So if you pull over to a point like this and fish some of these points, those bushes, when the water's high, are going to be shallow. In the back of the cut, they're going to be deeper. So that's always positive. Also, the back of the cuts, they always collect some debris. As you guys can see back there, the lay down trees. This debris, this shallow debris in the back of these cuts like this is another thing that really attracts the bass to these particular areas, because most all the time, depending upon water levels, you're going to have, stuff that naturally collects back in here. The wind blows it, gets hung up. So these are always good places when the water's higher, for the most part. And you can also see, the back of the cuts will have varying degrees of slopes that give the bass some options. Now, in lower water conditions like this, a lot of times the fish will just get out and use whatever cover is available there. So let's talk about technique here. Technique is there's two things that dictate technique in the back end of coves and cuts. One is the water clarity, and the other is the water temperature. You guys are on the channel, you hear me talk about that all the time. Water clarity and water temperature, it's the two biggest factors. But the temperature and the clarity will give you basically the methods and the times that are best for these things. For the most part, you're not going to catch a lot of fish in these back ends during the winter time. Now, in late winter or early spring, if you get a couple maybe warm days and you get some sun baking on this, a A lot of times you can pull up in here when the water's, you know, close to 50 degrees, upper 40s, and catch some fish like on a flat-sided crankbait or a lipless crankbait. That's a really good technique for that time of year. As the water temperature starts to warm up and you start to get in the 50s, that's when the back of the coves start to really heat up. Not only the very back end, but like the back 2/3 of the coves get really good. And you can catch them spinnerbait, crankbait, you know, chatterbait, any type of moving bait. And of course, everybody knows, you know, during the spring when the fish are spawning, the back end of coves are some of the prime areas that the bass like to spawn in. Traditionally, guys, the smaller bass will spawn in the very back of the coves, and the better fish will spawn a little farther out. Usually the back of the cove, since they're getting a lot of pressure, those bigger fish tend to avoid those. Now, these fish will stay back in these same areas in the back of the coves all through summer, because what happens is after they spawn, there's a percentage of those fish that live back in there. They're fry garters, you know, they like to live in shallow water. As it gets closer into summer, the bluegills move into these areas, and the bluegill will spawn in the back of these coves that keep the bass shallow. So there's a certain percentage of the bass that will live in the back of these coves all the way through into where it gets cold again. And that's why a lot of these are popular areas, because you can literally catch bass in the back of these coves as long as that water temperature is like over 50 degrees. Doesn't matter if it's March or doesn't matter if it's November. And like I said, techniques is dictated by, you know, time of year. The floating worms are really good, flukes. In the summertime, topwaters are excellent when the fish are feeding on bluegills. And then again, in the fall time of the year, you know, you can catch them on buzz baits, shallow running crankbaits, spinner baits. A lot of it depends on the light intensity versus the water clarity and the water level with that. So anyway, guys, they're really good places to fish. A lot of fish use them. Like I said, I personally try to avoid them if I can, simply because I've gotten burned so many times. I've gotten so excited in tournaments running a back of a cove pattern, only to get super disappointed in the tournament when I find out that there's 20 other boats that have been in there before I did. So that's my advice with it. Advice is fish them, you know, when you can, but don't try to put all your eggs in the basket of them, because it'll definitely hurt you in the long run. So anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in. Hey, please hit that subscribe button if you guys haven't had a chance, and the notification button. We're getting close to 85,000 subscribers. Got a big giveaway when that comes up. It'd be much appreciated. So we'll talk later. See you.